the idea was, and still is, this is important to understand, to proceed into Eastern Europe, to Europe, well, starting with Eastern Europe. And this is not happening. So the plan of 25, the strategic military campaign of 25, was based on the idea that Trump will force Ukraine to capitulate and that Europe will agree with this. And this did not happen. The entire 25 was spent to force Ukraine to capitulate. And this did not happen. So both Putin and Trump lost this campaign in relation to not just Ukraine, but Europe, what is even more important, uh, entirely.
Hello and welcome to Frontline. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we are speaking to Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky, author of Blowing Up Russia with Alexander Litvinenko and Blowing Up Ukraine, and of course many other books that our audience must read. Dr. Felshtinsky, thank you very much for joining us again today.
Thank you for your invitation.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Well, Ukraine has called for the US to suspend talks while the US-Israeli war with Iran continues. How do you think Russia are going to read that, and how useful do you think they've found these talks so far?
Well, I'm afraid America is not useful for those talks again because since the January of 25, when Trump became president, they are helping Putin to force Ukraine to capitulate. And every time they uh, propose a new draft of the peace plan, this is actually not a draft for the peace plan. This is a plan to surrender. And Ukraine is not going to surrender. Europe is not going to stop assisting Ukraine because Europe understands that Ukraine is holding the front, and if Russia takes Ukraine, they proceed into Eastern Europe immediately. So everyone is pretending that they're negotiating, but there is no room for negotiation. It's not going to happen. So we better not spend time on it, meaning that, I mean, European politicians who are involved in those negotiations, they better stop spending time for nothing. So I do not expect anything from negotiation process.
And with the Ukrainians calling for these talks to be paused for now while this war goes on in the Middle East, that could be quite beneficial for the Ukrainians then, who, as you say, have seen a lot of pressure um, in this conflict to make some form of concession.
Well, the United States, as well as Russia, of course, are still forcing or trying to force Ukraine to uh, basically to surrender. Again, I do not think this is going to happen. That's why I'm not really particularly nervous about the fact that everyone is pretending that they're negotiating. I think the conflict itself helps slightly Ukraine because Iran, as we know, was the country which supplied Russia with very particular drones, which Russians are using against Ukraine. And those drones are both cheap and deadly. And I hope that within the course of this war, military activity, which started probably, who knows, factories which were producing those drones might be hit by Americans or by Israelis. So this will help, of course, Ukrainians. But at the same time, as we do understand the conflict, the whatever American-Israeli and Iranian conflict probably will raise prices for oil and gas, and this helps Russia a little bit and make European life more difficult. So uh, it's uh, it's in some extent, it is probably useful for Ukraine that Iran, which is, you know, tied to Russia, and Russia, which is tied to Iran, that they are in conflict with the United States. But there is also possibility that Americans probably would feel that NATO is not obsolete, and this alliance might be useful to Americans if things become complicated, because prior to this, as we know, Trump made everything to destroy NATO quite successfully. So this might be a positive sign as well, and who knows, maybe Trump would not try to become so aggressive against Greenland, for example, because this would ruin relations with both NATO and European Union. So there might be some positive implications in relation with the current developments in the Middle East. But the risky side is, and the negative side is, of course, that this conflict might escalate. The conflict between Iran and the United States might escalate and cross the border into some other countries. And it's not by chance Iranians are trying to make this war the war of the Middle East, not just the American, Israeli, and Iranian conflict.
And Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova has called Trump's attack on Iran an imaginary, invented threat, saying that essentially the Americans have started this war on a false pretext. How should we judge the Kremlin's reaction to this conflict so far?
Well, I think, and this is difficult to prove at this point, and we do not really have enough information, but I think that uh, during the meeting between Putin and Trump in Alaska, they basically agreed to divide the world. This probably discuss something similar to the pact of Hitler and Ribbentrop. I mean, Hitler and Stalin, or Molotov and Ribbentrop in August of 1939. And I think the basic agreement was that America, of course, would control the American continent, including Venezuela, including Cuba, that Americans will have under its control Greenland and probably Iran. And Russia, in return, is getting permission to take Ukraine and to proceed with invasion into Europe. And that's why we do not really see a very strong opposition or condemnation from Russia in relation to Venezuela, events in Venezuela, events in Cuba, and events in Iran. And it's safe to say that Russia is not going to intervene, and Russia is not going to help Iran. And the reason for this is because I think this is under the contract which was, signed literally or not literally between Putin and Trump. So Americans know that they could do with Iran whatever they plan to do. The only problem is, I think, that they really do not know what they want to do with Iran. I mean, the first stage is always the easiest one. American army is a great army, no questions about this. If we add Israeli abilities towards this probably makes the blow very powerful. So no one is questioning the ability of these two states to destroy Iran from the air. But I think it's very difficult to change regime just by destroying the objects on the ground from the air. Oh, by the way, Russia has the same problems in Ukraine. They are bombing Ukraine, but this doesn't lead to victory and doesn't lead to those to fulfill those plans, objectives which Russia has in relation of Ukraine. You cannot win the war bombing the country. It helps when you know what you plan to do next. Americans do not know at this point what they plan to do next. Israelis, I'm sure, do not have plans to change the regime. I mean, everyone would be happy if we see the change of regime, but I think the groundwork for this was not started. I mean, it's not there yet. So we will see how the conflict will develop, of course.
And this would be, if Iran does fall or is significantly weakened, this would be the second Russian ally in that region that has collapsed in about a year and a half. Obviously, the previous regime I'm mentioning there is the Syrian regime, which collapsed a bit over a year ago now. We mentioned that agreement, Trump getting control over certain parts of the world, Russia getting control over others, that may have been the outcome of that meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So far, Trump seems to be coming off a lot better from that deal, if it is a deal. Given that Russia has not secured Ukraine and yet has lost Syria and possibly now Iran. Do you think the Kremlin will be worried about losing a second ally in the region?
Well, I think this is the price which Putin is paying. It's very important for him to take Ukraine. This we have to understand, not just because it's kind of shame that he is not able to take this small country after 4 years of war. Indeed, this is not 4 years of war. This is like 12 years of war, because the battle for Donbass, which they're still promising every time to take, by the end of the next month. This battle started in 2014, not in 2022, and they're still not able to take Donbass. So Russia is not able to take Ukraine, but the problem is for Putin is not even Ukraine itself, because initially in 22, Ukraine was planned to be taken as a result of blitzkrieg kind of war, in 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months, but they never planned to fight for it for years, losing more than a million people by now, and not only it became the longest year in the Russian history, including the Soviet history, but it's also the bloodiest war for Russia since the Second World War. So it's a I mean it's a terrible mistake, of course, which was made by Putin, but he's not able to recognize this. So it's very important to take, but it's very important to take Ukraine, because then the idea was, and still is, this is important to understand, to proceed into Eastern Europe, to Europe, well, starting with Eastern Europe. And this is not happening. So the plan of 25, the strategic military campaign of 25, was based on the idea that Trump will force Ukraine to capitulate and that Europe will agree with this. And this did not happen. The entire 25 was spent to force Ukraine to capitulate. And this did not happen. So both Putin and Trump lost this campaign in relation to not just Ukraine, but Europe, what is even more important, uh, entirely. Entirely. Because not only Europe refused to capitulate and stop to support Ukraine. But Europe basically understood that it cannot rely on the United States uh, as a ally, and it should build their own defense, system, create their own army, invest money into military budgets, and that's what we see. So if Putin planned invasion of Ukraine, invasion of Europe, I think he's late. By now, it's already too late. And the next 3 years will be very difficult because Trump still will be in the White House. Uh, but he might have his problems, like, for example, with the campaign in Iran, which, again, like Putin, he probably planned to finish everything in, like, whatever, 3 months. It's questionable whether they would be able to achieve whatever they were planning to achieve in 3 months. It's questionable, and I think this, even for Trump, it might be very difficult now to force Ukraine to surrender, to force Europeans to surrender. Although I believe that for Trump, this battle is still the major battle, is the battle against democracy, world democracy. And this includes not just half of the United States, literally, but it also includes Canada, and it includes Europe, of course. And we are going to see new and new attempts of Trump to suppress democracy in the world, uh, but it might be more difficult that he was planning, of course, to do. I think this battle will be lost at the end, but I think he will continue his struggle for these 3 years. So it's very important for Europe to hold for these 3 years, because whoever will replace Trump will come back to traditional American policy.
We mentioned that the costs to Russia of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and how that will have been affected by what is going on in the Middle East as well with oil prices. Of course, there has also been a pretty growing economic cost to Russia with this conflict, not least because of an ongoing attack on the Russian oil export industry by the Ukrainians. The latest on that is reports of a Russian LNG tanker exploding and sinking in the Mediterranean Sea. There are allegations that this was done by Ukrainian naval drones. How worried is the Kremlin going to be if these strikes start to expand to the kind of global Russian oil trade and not just strikes on refineries and other infrastructure within Russia itself?
Well, I do not think that Russia is happy that from time to time Ukrainians are, destroying oil refineries or tankers with Russian oil or with Russian gas. But at the same time, again, you cannot stop this war by doing this, because first, Russia is a huge country and a very rich country, and the supply is great. Secondly, uh, it's nice to destroy an enemy tanker, but by doing so, you actually increase the price for oil and gas. And this is an irony. You see, this is an irony that every time there is less supply of oil and gas on the world market, doesn't matter why, right? Whether because it was sabotaged or because its production is stopped, Russia is getting more money for what for the rest of the product which they still sell on the market. So I'm not sure that this is the best approach if the idea is to force Russia to negotiate. They are conducting this war now as a permanent war. This means that they, on the ground, this war reminds us First World War, right? The German-French front when troops were fighting in other for years and could not proceed. That's what's happening in Ukraine, and the positive part for Ukrainians is that they are killing and wounding more Russians that Russia is able to draft. But unfortunately, Russia is able to draft almost the same amount of people. I mean, those figures are very close. What means that you cannot, this will not force Russia to stop the war. And Russia has money, and Russia has weapons, and Russia has support of quiet support of China and open support of countries like Iran. Again, Iran might not be in a position to supply Russia with drones anymore, and this is a great achievement if this would happen. But Russia still would be able to continue this war. And so the question is how to force Russia to start to negotiate. Because again, so far Russia is not negotiating. They are, expecting capitulation, which they are ready to sign, but they are not actually negotiating with Ukrainians. Uh, and And the problem is that Russia is a huge country, but indeed this is a country of one city, and this city is Moscow. And the entire Russia is actually concentrated in Moscow. And this is not just 10% of population, which is huge, by the way. For a country like Russia, 10% of population of the entire country living in one city, it's a big deal. But it's this population which actually represents Russia, which makes decisions, which rules Russia. I mean, everything is in Moscow. All those people who are dealing with Russian business, they're in Moscow. All financial institutions are in Moscow. Everything is in Moscow. And believe it or not, Moscow is untouched. And it's untouched for a reason. And they were living since 22. Both Europeans and Americans, this was when Biden was president, were actually limiting Ukrainians with weapons, with kind of weapons they were given, with permissions, what Ukrainians may or may not do with these weapons. So, for example, for several years, Ukrainians were not allowed to use Western weapons to strike against the territory of the Russian Federation. If you think about this, this is a ridiculous demand. You cannot win the war. You actually cannot fight the war if you are not able, if you are not allowed to strike against the territory of your enemy. Ukrainians had the right to use Western weapons in strike against their own occupied territories, like Crimea, but they were not allowed to use those weapons to strike against the territory of the Russian Federation. This changed by the end of Biden in the White House. This changed, and Ukrainians basically were allowed to use Western weapons, and with time they started to get Western tanks and Western planes. But right now, for example, they have American planes, but they do not have missiles for them, and they're not able to use them actually because Trump is not giving them to Ukrainians. Trump is not selling them to Ukrainians, and those planes are useful. And believe it or not, until now, uh, Moscow is not allowed to be touched. Even now, Europeans do not give Ukrainians long-range missiles because they know that Ukrainians will use them in strikes against Moscow. Uh, but this is the only development which could change the course of this war. Otherwise, Russia will fight forever. Are they able to fight forever? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They might have difficulties with money. They might have deficit of the budget, which is much greater than officially announced. But this will not stop the war. This will not force Russia to negotiate. The only reason they will start to negotiate is if Moscow is under attack.
But are European nations not right to worry about what sort of retaliation Putin or the Kremlin would use if Moscow came under that sort of direct bombardment? I mean, the Russians have repeatedly threatened. They've not actually fulfilled any of these threats yet, of course, but they've repeatedly threatened the use of nuclear weapons in some degree. Is that not a risk if Moscow is bombarded?
Correct. Let's put it this way. This is the only reason Ukrainians are not getting long-range missiles from European allies. Uh, but we have to remember that we hear those red lines, which Russia presents to both Ukrainians and Europeans from the first day of the war, and we know that basically this is bluff. That they are bluffing. I do understand the problem. It's very difficult for a responsible politician to claim that a bluff of nuclear strike is a bluff. Oh, don't worry, guys. I mean, they are bluffing. We will give Ukrainians what they want. Let them attack Moscow. Oh, we know Russia is bluffing. They won't do anything. But I understand that this is kind of impossible situation for any European politician. This is not going to happen. I mean, there's a reaction like this, but at the same time, uh, unless Ukrainians are able to strike against Moscow, nothing will be changed in this war for better. And the question is, how long realistically Ukrainians could hold the front. I mean, they do have motivation, they do have people, they do have weapons, but Russia is destroying Ukraine from the air every day. And if you see footages of the cities which either Russians are taken by the end of the local fight for a city, or Ukrainians are freeing, they take a city back from the Russians. This would be a city where not a single house is intact. I mean, it's a completely ruined territory, and that's what Russians do when you slowly proceed deep into Ukrainian territory. Uh, if Ukrainians are able to stop it entirely, this is great. If they would be able to take some territories back, this is even greater. But what they're getting back is a completely ruined territory where not a single alive person is, and not a single building standing. And if Russia is allowed to destroy Ukraine from the air, and this conducts this one-way operations when Ukrainians are not able actually to answer with the same because they do not have weapons for this. Uh, then, at one point we probably would see Ukraine, which might be completely ruined, and it might be very difficult to hold positions in that ruined Ukraine. And the problem is that even if we allow ourselves to be cynical, if the idea is, well, let Ukrainians fight and we will help them, right? But let them fight, and this war will never come to us. This is probably a wrong approach because once again, and this is not a secret, as soon as Ukrainian front is broken, Russian troops will move into Europe. By the way, every single plan which Trump and Putin presented to Ukraine as peaceful plans included complete or partial demobilization of the Ukrainian army. Not a single plan included demobilization of the Russian army. And the question is why? And we know why, because Putin is not planning to demobilize the Russian army. Putin is planning to invade Europe. And in addition to this, every time Russia takes territory with people, like this was happening usually, I mean, this was happening in 2014 and in the beginning of the war of 22, they start to draft Ukrainian male population into Russian army. They issue Russian passports to them and they draft them into the Russian army. So for Putin, this is not just a fight for Ukraine. This is not just a fight for territory. This is also a fight for population, for male population, which he plans to draft into Russian army. And some of that population, by the way, has great military experience after these 4 years of war. So it's going to be very, very dangerous if Ukraine is taken for Europe. And then we will see the classical World War III, because countries which are bordering Russia from the European East, Russian West, these are motivated countries. We may name them: Finland, Sweden, the Baltic states, Poland, Ukraine. Right? They're going to fight. They're not going to surrender. They're not going to capitulate like Putin hopes. They're going to fight, and then Europe will be in World War III. So, is it risky to make a political decision and to give Ukrainians long-range missiles? No, I do not think so. I understand why European politicians think that this is risky, but I do not think so. Will Russia use nuclear weapons? No, Russia will not use nuclear weapons. There was an idea, I'm sure that Putin came with this idea, of course, to move nuclear weapons to Belarus and to strike Europe from Belarus. So retaliation will be against Belarus and not against Russia. But at the end, as far as we know, Russia never moved nuclear weapons to Belarus. Maybe because they were afraid of preemptive strikes. Because I would argue that if Russia moves nuclear weapons to Belarus, then Europeans and Ukrainians have preemptively strike against nuclear weapons in Belarus. Well, like Trump is doing now against Iran. And the second reason might be that probably Putin was afraid that Ukrainians would find a way to take control of that nuclear weapons and to move it to Ukraine. And the third reason might be that Putin doesn't really trust Lukashenko, because who knows, Lukashenko might try to become an independent dictator if he has nuclear weapons. So one way or another, Russia didn't move nuclear weapons to Belarus. And I do not really think that Russia is, how to say, is able to come to a decision to use nuclear weapons. I think this is not happening for many reasons, including the main one that you really do not know what's going to happen after you use it. It's very difficult to make all these calculations. So I do not think that we are risking to have nuclear war, but we are risking to have, in the beginning at least, conventional war, classical World War III, if Russia is able to proceed into Europe. As long as we have a Ukrainian army, this is not going to happen because Russians do not have ground forces to invade Europe while they're involved in the battle against Ukraine. And we know this because in September of 25, they announced actually the concentration of 100,000, approximately 100,000 Russian troops, which would be moved to Belarus to conduct military exercises. And we know that similar military exercises, quote unquote, because this should be in quotations, of 22 ended with invasion of Ukraine. So when Putin announced that they are going to have new military exercises in Belarus in September of 25, it was clear that they are planning either to start another attack against Kiev, because you cannot, again, for Putin, you cannot proceed with this war unless you take Kiev. This is just an impossible task. Or maybe Putin was planning to open the second front and to invade Europe. But at the end, instead of 100,000 people, they managed to send to Belarus 3,000 people to participate in those military exercises. What means for us that they do not have ground forces for invasion, but they do not have them as long as those ground forces are involved in fight in Ukraine, and that's why all quote unquote peaceful plans included the mobilization of the Ukrainian army, because at this point the Ukrainian army is a guarantee of European security. Where every time we talk about Ukrainians and Europeans negotiating about peace, etc., discussing how to achieve peace. Every time we do this, we discuss the issue of European guarantees for security to Ukraine. But indeed, the situation is the opposite. By now, it's Ukraine who is the guarantor of the European peace, because as long as the Ukrainians are fighting, Putin is not able to invade Europe, and that's how it is. But the question is whether Ukrainians would be able, for example, to hold for 3 more years. And I sincerely hope that they are able to hold for 3 more years while Trump is in the White House. But you better create conditions for the Russian government to be motivated to start negotiations.
And just finally, Dr. Felshtinsky, last month a collective of Western nations released a report stating that Russian dissident Alexei Navalny was deliberately killed by Russia using the toxin found in poison dart frogs. Given your previous work with Alexander Litvinenko, was there ever any doubt in your mind that Russia had essentially deliberately assassinated Alexei Navalny?
No, of course not. And what's interesting is that poison, of course, was a favorite weapon for the Russian KGB, GRU, special forces. There is a reason for this. And in case of Navalny, it was extremely helpful. Well, first of all, if the person is killed with a knife or with a gun or with explosive materials, then we know that the person is killed. If he is poisoned, like Litvinenko or like Skripal, number one, for some time it's not clear what actually happened, and this gives killer or contra killer or FSB guy trying to escape. So we know that in case of Litvinenko, in case of Skripal, those people who poisoned them, they successfully escaped back to Russia. Uh, when they're using simple guns, like in case of Krasikov, who killed a Chechen military commander in Berlin, or when they used explosive materials, when they killed former president of the Chechen Republic, Yandarbiyev in Kantar. In both cases, they were caught, uh, and and that's of course uh, not what was planned initially by Russian special forces. In case of Navalny, it was important to kill him with a poison, so uh, it would not become very clear if he died or if he was killed. And the reason for this was that they were in the middle of the deal of exchanging Krasikov for a group of dissidents, which included Navalny. But they didn't want so much to release Navalny that they decided to kill him in the last moment. But if they would do it with a whatever gun or a knife in the prison where he was sitting, then Germans would probably stop the deal, and the exchange would not take place. So they made a decision, quote unquote, smart decision to poison him, because then this would take some time for everybody to understand what actually was happening, whether Navalny died, unfortunately, or whether he was killed. And by that time, the exchange would proceed successfully. And that's precisely what happened. So at the end, now we know that Navalny was poisoned. We formally know that Navalny was poisoned, but it's too late in terms of that particular exchange operation, which was conducted by the FSB.
Well, Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky, Russian-American historian and author of Blowing Up Russia with Alexander Litvinenko and Blowing Up Ukraine, thank you very much for joining me today on Frontline.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for watching Frontline. For all the latest updates on the war in Ukraine and global security, you should subscribe to this channel. You can also hear us on Times Radio's overnight programming, and you can also find us wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, for the latest news and analysis, you can listen to Times Radio, or you can read the latest news at thetimes.com, and you can go over and subscribe to the Times YouTube channel for the latest news and analysis on all global news updates. Remember, for the latest on US news, you can listen to the Trump Report wherever you get your podcasts, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.